Jason here with yet another coaster cutout video. If you saw my last video, you saw me assembling the full X2 train from Six Flags Magic Mountain from Coaster Dynamics and Print My Ride. In this video, I'd like to show you how I paint the model. If you saw my last painting model, which was the New Texas Giant, this one will be a little bit different for a couple of reasons. First off, this model is much larger. With New Texas Giant, we just had one car, and the car was actually quite a bit smaller than this. But more than that, this one actually has some moving features. So before we get started, I've already disassembled it. I've taken the cars off of the track. I have the track off to the side. We'll be painting that first. But beyond that, this train features a feature where these guide wheels here cause the seats to rotate. And that's something that I don't want to mess with. If you look, there's actually a pretty tight fit in there. So if we get any paint down in there, that's going to mess with the model a little bit. And so to handle that, I've actually purchased a metallic silver marker to color these, so we're not having to paint them. I'll probably do that around the openings as well. We want to make sure that we don't mess with the gears at all as we paint this model. Everything else, we're just going to use the standard paints like we have before. But for the mechanical parts of this build, I don't want to be getting any paint on that. As well as like with the pieces that rotate here. Don't want to be getting any paint near those things because I don't want to affect the rotation of the build. Even if that means having a little bit of wood exposed, I think it's going to be better that way to not have anything messed up. In addition to that, as I paint the model, I may be taking a few of the pieces off. For instance, the over-the-shoulder restraints, probably be removing them so that they can be painted separately and the seats behind them can be painted fully without getting paint on them. So we'll move on to the track. Now, I've mentioned in my previous videos that painting these models doesn't have to be an expensive endeavor, and it's also not extremely difficult. It's something that really a beginner can tackle. For the paints, I use these apple barrel paints from Walmart that retail anywhere from 50 cents to $1 each, depending on the sheen and color, and if you get glitter or metallic and things like that, but really cheap. For the brushes, I got these brushes from Walmart as well, just a multi-pack for about $6. So for about 10-15 bucks, you can get all of the supplies you need to paint an entire $200 model and really add a lot of vibrance to it. Before you get started, you want to make sure that you protect your surface. Here I have some packing paper that I put down to protect my table. Don't want to be getting any paint on it. I also have some paper towels handy, as well as a cup of water that I will refresh a few times throughout the painting. This allows me to wash my brushes, and then I can dab them off onto the paper towel. When planning out your paint job, the first thing you'll want to do is find reference images of the coaster you're trying to paint. Over here on my laptop, I have 5 photos of X2 that I found using Google image searches and also from photos that I've taken that show the details of the train from different angles as well as different parts to make sure I have everything covered. From there, you'll want to go out and purchase the paint colors that you need to accomplish what you're doing. Some of the colors you may be able to accomplish by mixing other colors. For instance, if you have black and white in your collection, you can always use those to darken and lighten colors a little bit. For X2, I'm going to be beginning with the track. For this, I chose a real red color. The track on X2 is a really rich, a little bit darker red, not quite a fire truck red, a little bit darker than what I used on the New Texas Giant. And then for the supports, I'm using dark granite. A lot of people say that X2 is red and black, but really if you look at the supports, they're a dark gray. And for that, I'll be using dark granite. If it's not dark enough, I may be using a little bit of black mixed in with it. However, I do believe it's dark enough. Last night, I actually took the time to paint my box back there that the whole kit came in. And I used these same colors just to kind of see if they were really what I wanted. And so I really feel like the colors match up with the real coaster there. And so here we'll get started. For the track, I'm gonna begin with the red, mostly because I found it's easier to work your way from top to bottom on these things. If you work your way from the bottom up, then when you get to the top, if you have any drips, you're gonna have to paint over those drips here at the bottom anyways. Where if we start at the top and it drips down, we're gonna be painting over those areas in the end anyways with a darker color. So it's really not that big of a deal. I'll grab my paintbrush here. As we begin on the track, I'm gonna grab my largest paintbrush here and dry it off here from the cup on the paper towel. Then I'll grab the red paint and just start brushing it on. I'm starting with the largest brush here just because there are a lot of large pieces here on the track, not a lot of fine details. I may have to use a finer one when we get down into the cracks. But for this, I'm just going to use the largest brush to kind of go over these large pieces and the rails. I'm starting with the spine here, but I'll be doing the rails next. And I still feel like the big brush will probably be the best one for that. We're going to be giving this track this really bright, vibrant, rich red color that X2 is known for. Now, one of the areas that the track differs here from the Dueling Dragons one that I did behind me, with the B&M track spine, Coaster Cutout chose to do a solid spine, so it was a full box around, and then I just painted the perimeter. However, with the Arrow one, you can see that it's not a box. It's actually hollow in the middle there. And because you're going to be able to see the middle, I feel like the inside needs to be painted as well. So I'm actually going to be painting inside of the red track as well. Just to make it look complete. I don't really want to have any of the visible wood showing through, so we will be painting inside as well. However, on the actual coaster, that spine is not hollow. Now, a couple of things you do want to watch for as you're painting, especially as you rotate the model, as in certain areas the paint may pool up a little bit. And if you don't want to have runs and bubbles and stuff in it, you want to make sure that you quickly brush those before it dries, just to make sure, like I said, that it doesn't pool up. So that's one of the things I'm looking for as I rotate the model, is areas that there might be runs or bubbles or pooling of the paint. Also, on the edges, because this is laser cut, the edges of the wood are quite a bit darker than the sides. And so as you're painting it, you may need to add an extra coat of paint just to cover the edges, unless you want the darker look there. But if you don't want the darker look there, you'll probably want to do an extra coat of paint. For the rails and for the cross ties, I've actually moved to a smaller brush. This will allow me to get into some of the tighter areas easier, I believe, and get that painted. So we'll continue here with the rails. And now we have a completed red coat of paint on the track. A couple of nice things about the paint. First off, it does dry pretty quickly, at least to the touch, so you can start handling it. When you're painting this, you want to make sure you rotate it in different directions, make sure you get good coverage. There are areas you'll probably need to do 2 coats, but like I said, since it dries so quickly, you'll be able to come back and do that second coat pretty quickly after as well. But there you can see that the track, I'm really happy with the way that it looks. So we'll be moving on to the dark gray supports now, which should be quite a bit quicker. Painting the track may have looked pretty quick in the video due to the magic of editing. However, according to the camera, it looks like it took just under an hour to really get a good coverage on the red paint there. So we really quick on the edit. Plan on really taking some time to paint these models. Typically for the full train models, several hours. For the one car, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours, depending on how complex. The new Texas Giant one was pretty quick. However, one of these ones might be a little bit longer. But now we'll move on to the dark gray paint. For the dark gray paint, this one should go a little bit faster. Mostly there's not as much space that we need to paint here with it. And also, it's not as complex of a space, not as many cracks. This is just gonna be the support area here. And it's not gonna use very much paint either. One thing to take note of when you're painting one of these, you shouldn't ever need more than one bottle of a paint color for most of the models. With Dueling Dragons, I did need 2 turquoises, just because the entire track and a lot of the train was turquoise. However, on X2, most of the track here is red, but there is no red at all anywhere on the trains. So we won't be using that color anymore, and I still have about half the bottle here. So you don't really need a ton of any color of paint when you're painting one of these models. 1 bottle of each should suffice. For the gray, I've switched back to the fatter brush that allows me to cover bigger flat areas pretty quickly. So we'll dive right in. Now that I've gotten the bases done, I'm going to move to a slightly smaller brush to get the supports. Here we want to be a little bit more careful, especially as we get closer to the red, that we don't get any overbleed between the 2 colors. With the red, we didn't have to be as careful because we're going to be going over it here with the dark gray. However, with the dark gray, we really just want to come up to the edges of the red and then stop there. You also notice I did paint the bottoms of the bases. Typically not necessary, you're never going to see them. However, I like to just get good coverage on everything. Make sure you can't see any of the wood. So I'm going to let those dry a little bit more as I paint the rest of this. So I'm just going to kind of hold it upside down as I go inside and paint. And there we have the completed X2 track. The track once ago was painted with a real red paint with a dark granite supports. When this coaster was first built as X, the track was originally pink with yellow supports. When they redid it to X2, they kind of gave it a little bit more of an intimidating color scheme with the deep red and the dark gray supports, which I think really looks a lot better. However, these colors are no longer going to be used. They're not used at all in the trains. So we'll put the real red and dark granite off to the side, clean up our surface, and then move on to the trains. Now moving on to the trains, you can already see that I have the lead car, which is actually the rear car on X2 completed. I had a few camera problems as I was painting this, and so I don't have a lot of footage of this one. But fortunately, I have 4 other cars, and so I can show you painting one of those. Painting these cars is all pretty much the same, except for this one has the zero car here at the end with a speaker box and an additional set of wheels. But that's really just the same 2 colors that I use on the rest of the train here. You can also see here that I have the seats even with the mechanism. One of the things that I was really worried about with the mechanism and painting this was would it still work? And I think I found a solution that actually works pretty well. So you can see as I move this up and down, the seats still turn just fine. There's really no issues with that. And so my solution with this is I pull off one of these other seats. You can see that this is already colored here, but rather than painting this with paint, I actually colored it with a permanent marker. And I do have footage of that, so I'm gonna put that clip in right here. One thing I mentioned earlier is that with the X2 train, it includes a mechanical aspect that I feel like could be jammed up a little bit if we were to use paint on that. And because of that, I've actually purchased a metallic silver chisel point Sharpie, and I'm gonna be using this to color both the up and down gear elements as well as around the openings on the train. I feel like if any paint got onto those areas, then that would ultimately jam up the gears so that the mechanical element would no longer work. And that's not something that I'm wanting to do. I want that to continue working. So with the chisel point Sharpie here, I'm actually going to set this train up back off to the side, and I'll take one of these up and down gear elements that we removed from the train, and we'll simply just color the wood. You can see there, hopefully, that it's actually laying on pretty well. It looks really nice without actually painting it, but it also doesn't make it thick or do anything that will mess it up mechanically, so that the wheels should be able to still move up and down, causing the seats to rotate freely. When we do the seats, I'm actually probably going to remove them as well, and we won't get any paint near where the actual rotation happens with the seats either. We'll try to keep those areas clean as well. I'm just going to continue around this element here. And there you can kind of see one of the completed gear elements. Has pretty good silver coverage all over, even though there's actually no paint on there. So I'll continue and I'll do the rest of those right now. So now that you can see how I painted these, it's time to move on to one of the trains. Now before we begin painting, one of the first things we're going to want to do is do a little bit of disassembly here to make things a little bit easier. In the end, it may be easier to do the painting as you build, but I wanted to include this in 2 different videos, and because of that, I'm going to have to do a little bit of disassembly. The first thing I'm going to want to remove here is the seats on the ends. To do that, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to simply rock it back and forth a little bit and kind of twist it around. I don't want to pull the gear out, so I really just need to detach the seat here from the end. I also have a little tool here that might allow me to pry once I get a little gap. I can put that tool in the little gap and just kind of twist it to separate the seat from the little plus sign piece at the end. And there we have our removed seat. We'll remove the other one as well. And now that both seats are removed, the next thing we want to remove is the wheels. The wheels are pretty much the same. We'll come down here, we'll just kind of rock them back and forth a little bit and pull them off. Once again, don't want to break anything, but we'll detach the wheels here so that we can work with them. In addition to removing that stuff from the main car, I'm also going to remove a few things from each of the seats. These inner panels here are going to be painted black, and I don't want that to bleed onto anything else, so I'm actually going to remove these from the ends of each seat as well. Once again, if you just kind of pry it back and forth, be careful, it should peel off pretty easily on each of the seats. And then lastly, I want to pop the restraints off of each of the seats as well. For these, I can rock them back and forth just a little bit, and then when I get a little bit of a gap, use a little tool and pry it up. The other side, it will just lift up right there. Same thing with the second restraint. And all 4 restraints are now removed. Everything else should be able to stay on the trains. Now as we begin painting, the first color I'm actually going to do is the orange for the restraints. The reason for this is, especially on the edges, the orange kind of goes on dark and the dark shows through, and so I'm going to want to do a couple of coats with it drying in between. So I'm going to get my orange paint ready here and grab a brush from my clean water, dab it off, and just begin painting these things. So there's the painted restraints. As I mentioned earlier, you can still see a lot of the brown from the burnt edge from the laser through the orange, and that's why I really need to do a couple of coats, but I need to let these dry a little bit. So after I finish the next step, I'm actually going to return to the restraints and we'll apply that second coat. For now, I'm just going to put this off to the side. So while we wait for the restraints to dry, I'm going to move on to painting the body of the train. The body of the train is just going to be one color here. However, as I mentioned earlier with the mechanisms, I want to do the Sharpie marker first of all around the openings. So we'll start with the marker here. So we'll take the marker and we'll just simply go around the openings of where the gear piece is going to run up and down. I'll do that on both the top and the bottom of the train. And I can cover a little bit of extra area because I will be coming over some of this with the paint as well. But this is just allows us to get good coverage all the way to the opening without having any paint drip down into the gears or clogging the opening. So that's what it looks like with the silver metallic marker on there. For the train body, I'm going to be using this granite gray color, which is just a light gray. You can see some of it down here on my paper. But I'm just going to squeeze a bunch of this out. And for this, we'll start with the biggest brush that I have. Dab it off, get it all dry. And then start painting. With the big brush, we're able to get some good coverage. We'll probably have to use the smaller brush to get some of the finer details. But the big brush will allow us to at least get started and go pretty quickly before we get into the detail portions of the train. So here you can see that brush allowed me to get pretty good coverage pretty quickly. Now as I get closer to these holes, I actually want to be a little bit more careful and maybe not go quite as fast. Because once again, I don't want to be getting paint down in the openings. I just want to get as close to the openings as possible. But knowing that the metallic marker is going to cover up the rest of it. It's a little bit different color, but looking at the first train I did, it actually looks just fine. I also want to be careful when I paint around the snap-on pieces here at the end that I don't get any paint inside of there, because that has to be able to spin freely as the gear moves up and down. So I don't want to get any paint on that, and I'll actually create kind of a little border around that as well. I'm actually running out of paint here pretty quick, so I'm going to squirt some more out. I'm going to be moving to actually a smaller brush now to get into some of the finer details. Now while you're painting, you can actually use the little gears or the plus sign thing on the bottom to balance this off the table so that you can paint. You can hold on to the top one while you balance it on the bottom one. This way none of the wet areas are touching the table, and hopefully by the time I'm done there will be enough dry spaces that I can actually set it down. Now that I have a good coat of paint on there, I'm actually going to be switching to my smallest brush now to get some of the finer details. A couple of things that you'll want to watch as you paint this is the holes in it. You'll want to make sure you get paint around the insides of the openings there. And then something that you may not notice at first, but through some of the larger holes you can actually see some of the wood inside. And because of that, I'm actually going to be painting some of the interior surfaces. Not all of them. I'm just going to kind of look around through the holes and see which ones I can see wood through. And inside of those ones, I'll stick the brush in and paint just the surfaces that I can see through them. Just that way, so when you're looking at the train, you're not going to see any wood pieces. It's going to look like it's all metal. As I go around, I'm also looking for areas that the paint is pooled. And rather than dipping off the table, I'm trying to pull paint from those areas to fill in the holes and gaps, just so we don't have any paint bubbles here when it's all completed. So there you can see the body of the train now has a pretty good coat of this gray paint. We're going to slide that out of the way. And the next piece we're going to begin painting is the seats. I'm going to try to stick to just one color at a time and get that color complete before I move on to the next color. That way we're not wasting paint. In fact, if you wanted to paint all 5 of your trains at the same time, that may be a way to conserve paint. That way you're not having, dried up paint from moving back and forth between colors. So in addition to the gray on the body of the train, there's also going to be gray on the seats. Not a ton. However, if you look at the back of here, you can see that there is gray there. On the front, there's some gray just next to the seats. The seats are going to be mostly black, blue on the front with the metallic silver for the armrests. So we'll grab a medium-sized brush in one of the seats and just begin painting on the bottom. I've mentioned this with other areas of the train too. With the first color, you don't have to be 100% precise. You don't want to really go overboard and overlap areas that you don't want paint on. However, because I'm going to be doing some black next to this and things like that, if I'm not 100% precise with the gray and I go a little bit into those areas, they're going to be covered up pretty quick. I do want to get good coverage on all my areas that are gray. But like I said, if it bleeds over into the black area or the blue area or the metallic area a little bit, I will be painting over that. As you can see, when I paint over the burnt edges with the gray paint, it actually gives pretty good coverage, unlike the orange that I still need to apply a second coat to. Once I've completed all of the gray, we'll probably go back to the orange and get that second coat and see if a second coat is enough or if we need to do a third. But we'll get that second coat out of the way as soon as we're done with this. There we've completed one of the seats. We'll move on to the second one now. There we have the second completed car. So you can see, like I said, we painted on the front, we painted the speaker grills, as well as the top between the seats. And then on the back, we painted the entire, the 4 railings, as well as the bottom of the seat and the back of the seat. And I found a little place I need to touch up there. But we got those areas all pretty good coverage there. And so we'll set that one down to dry as well. Now that we have that done, we can move on to putting our second coat of paint onto the over-the-shoulder restraints. Now that we have the orange done with the over-the-shoulder restraints, let's move on to black. Now moving on to the black, the first thing we're actually going to paint is these side guards that go next to the trains that attach to the sides of the seats. On X2, these are completely black, just right here on the side. So we're going to take one of these, and I'm going to start with the edges, and I'm going to approach it from one direction. So as I go around with the edge here, I can just kind of spin it around in my finger, and I'm able to get the edge there, and it's also painting a little bit on one side. You don't really want to get paint on both sides yet, because then there's no way you can set it down to let it dry. But by doing it this way, we get coverage on on the edge, as well as a little bit on one side. Then we can just come in here and kind of go over it really quickly and get good coverage on that side. Same thing with the other one. We'll grab this one, kind of go around the edge, and then the same thing, we'll just kind of get a lot of paint here and go over this plain edge. I'm just kind of give it a good coat of paint over there. Make sure none of the wood is showing through, and just give it a really good dark coat. But not too thick. We want it to be able to still dry fairly quickly. But there we have a pretty decent coat, like I said, around the edge as well as on one side. While we wait for that to dry, we can also paint a few other things black. We'll set this brush off into the water, and I'm going to move on to a little bit smaller brush. So on the seats, there's a few black areas as well. So the seat bottom, the seat backs, as well as these parts that wrap around your waist are all going to be black. And so we'll just begin by painting that. So I'll grab some black paint and we'll first start down here in the seat bottom. Some of the areas we don't need to be super careful with. However, when we're going up against the gray that we've already painted, we want to make sure we're really careful on those edges to not get any on there. This front piece is going to be blue, so if we get a little bit on the inside of that, it's not a big deal. If you get it on the outside, it's going to be a little bit harder to cover black up, but on the inside, you can get it close enough, just mostly because it's not very visible. So I'm just simply painting the seat bottoms here. So there we have the seat bottoms painted. Moving on up, we'll kind of start with the seat backs. I'll start with the bottom portion and just kind of get some black paint on there. It's kind of hard to get the brush in there, so you'll need to be using a little bit smaller brush to get good coverage there. Once you have the seat back, we'll move on to the part that goes around your waist. So first start at this back edge, just kind of take the brush very lightly along that back edge. We don't want to get it overlapping on any of the gray, but if we just take the edge of the brush and kind of get back there, we can do that, and then we can pull out towards the front and just brush forward to paint the rest of the top of that. We also want to make sure we paint the edge of that thing as well, all the way around except on the inner side. So this one side is actually going to be flush against one of these black pieces, so you're not going to be able to see it. So that side, wherever side has the 3 prongs sticking out, you don't need to get paint on that side, just because you won't be able to see it anyways. You can paint it, doesn't really matter, but we're not going to use our paint over there or time to do that. We're just going to kind of go around the other edges. Same thing with underneath the restraint. You can kind of see a little bit of a gap there, especially when the seat's rotating. You can see a little bit of the underside there. So we're actually going to just paint, but only on one end, only on the end that's going to be visible. Like I said, the other side is going to be inside, blocked by one of these guards. We don't need to really make sure we have any black paint on that. The next step after that is the seat backs. So just right here in the middle. Once again, we're going up against the edge of the gray. Don't want to really overlap onto the gray. We're just going to kind of go straight up those edges there. And then over the top, same thing on the back. We're going to just kind of go right and meet up to the bottom of the gray with the seat back here at the top. We'll do the same thing on the other side. And that is going to do it for the black on the seat. There's still a few colors we have to put in, but that, like I said, that does it for the black on the seat. We'll repeat that on the other seat now. And the last place on the seats we're going to have black is actually on the handles of the over-the-shoulder restraints. So not a lot of black on here, but just right down here where the handles are at the bottom. We're just going to kind of take some black and go right over the top. And then also brush just the sides of the handles. We don't want to get it on the rest of the restraint. So as you can see, we just want the handle there. We'll do that on both sides of each of the restraints. Now that we've painted all those other sections black, the last thing to do is to go back to these things, the side panels that are now dry enough to flip over, and simply paint the other side black as well. And that'll do it for our black. So now let's move on to silver metallic. So with our sterling silver paint here, this is going to give a little bit of a metallic look. We're going to use this in a few different places. One of them is the wheels, but before that I'm actually going to be using it on the seats as well in a few different places. First of all, if you look at the back of the seats, there's those circles painted in the gray. What those are on the actual ride are speakers, and they show up a little bit more of a chrome metallic on the actual ride. So I'm actually going to get my small brush here, and I'm just going to kind of dab and fill in those. In fact, I'm going to get a smaller brush here. I'm going to get my smallest one and just kind of use this to dab and fill in those dots with a little bit of this metallic paint. It's not a ton different from the gray, but that's we really don't want it to be. It's just to add a little bit more texture to the back of the train. So now you can see the speakers just look a little bit different. The second area on the train that's going to have the metallic paint is the handles on the side. On X2, most of the train is this light gray color. However, the handles are more of a chrome. So we're actually going to take this and just paint right on the side and get some of this metallic silver on there. It looks really nice next to the gray. Just like I said, adds a little bit of a different color, a little bit more character to the train. Also get some on the tops of the handles. Make sure we get around to the back. So there you can kind of see the darker metallic contrasting with the gray there. And I'll do the same thing with the other seat. Now that we have the handles and the speakers done on both sets of seats, as I mentioned before, the other thing that we need to do with the silver metallic is the wheels. So each train has the two sets of wheels like this, as well as these pieces that snap on the top of them. But in addition to that, we also have the wheels that move the seats, that rotate them. As you remember before, we painted most of this with the permanent marker. However, the actual wheels at the bottom we're going to use paint on rather than the Sharpie. And when I do that, you'll actually see that the Sharpie and the paint match extremely well. You really can't even see where they blend together. For painting the wheels, I'm actually going to use a little bit bigger brush. I really just want to lay the paint on there and get good coverage. There's not a lot of details with this. I paint the wheels completely solid, just one color. I'm going to start with the up and down wheels. I'll just paint this really quick. Set that off to the side. So there you can kind of see what that looks like. As I mentioned, this top part is colored with a marker. The bottom part is the sterling silver paint from Walmart. They blend together really well. But with the marker on the top portion, it doesn't interfere with the mechanics, where the paint can get a little bit thicker, a little bit stickier to the touch, or have a little bit more rubbery of a texture, which I think would mess with the gear mechanism. The paint does not. For these other wheels, I'm actually going to start with these little discs. We're going to only paint the laser etch side. For this, I'll just simply put the piece down here on the table and kind of go over it. I also want to make sure we paint the edges of this. This one's going to be a little bit more difficult to paint without getting a little bit of paint on my fingers, but that's okay. So that piece is now painted. Same thing with the other one. We can probably start with the edges and maybe get a little bit less. Put that down and then dab a little bit on the front. But like I said, it's going to be really hard. It's a small piece without really anywhere to hold. So you're going to get a little bit of paint on your fingers most likely. And then with the wheels, same thing as the other ones. We just really want to get good coverage. Notice I actually switched to some tweezers to help me hold this a little bit better here. As I paint this, I'm just holding one of the tabs on the top that connects into the vehicle. And this allows me to really paint this all before it dries. I'm going to need some of it to dry a little bit before I set it down. And that'll do it for the silver metallic. The last color that we have to paint now before we start putting everything back together is the blue. So let's get that ready. So blue is the final color we're going to paint with here. And blue is just going to be this piece at the front here that kind of pulls it all together. So it's this part that your feet rest over if you look at the train over there. But it really makes the train pop. You can see the three colors here together already look really good. But the blue is really going to help pull it together a little bit more. So we'll just begin painting it. Now when we paint it, we want to paint the front, but we also want to paint the edges and the inside. Once again, this car rotates, and so you really want to have every side of the car painted so that as the seat rotates, you can still see the color and not any of the bare wood. There's the first seat done. We'll do the second one. And there we have the blue complete now. So everything is now painted on this train. And so we'll let the paint dry as I move on and start painting some of the other stuff. And then we'll come back once it's all dry and put it back together. So now that we have everything painted, the next step is to assemble it really quickly. The first thing we'll put on is the over-the-shoulder restraints. So we'll grab one of our seats here, along with two of our over-the-shoulder restraints, and just snap them back into place right where they came off here at the top. One thing you may notice, if you got any paint on any of the tabs or in any of the holes, it is a little bit more difficult to push the pieces in. However, once you get them in, they also stay in place a lot better, just because it kind of acts as a glue. And doesn't allow the pieces to fall out or slide out as easily. So we'll get that attached, and then the other one. And then we also need to add the guard to the side of the seat. Now even though it's painted, you can see the laser etching still on there. We want that facing out towards the seat, so we'll face that direction towards the seat here and just press it back into place. There we have our first seat completed. We'll do the same 3 steps on the other side. So now that the 2 seats are assembled, the next step is to put the wheels back on the chassis here. We're only going to be doing the main wheels right now. So to do that, we'll take one of the wheel assemblies here and slide one of these rings back over the top, and then press it down into place onto the assembly. And then repeat with the other wheel as well. Now before we attach the wheels that cause the seats to rotate, we'll want to put the seats back on. You still have the plus shaped sign there that's unpainted on here, allowing it to move freely. And you have the plus signs, and you have the pluses on here as well. So we can just line those up and press it back into place. And then the last step is something I didn't focus on too much in the original video, and that's getting these wheels lined up properly. So the goal here, when you have your seat straight, is to have it so that you can see basically 3 gaps in the gear at the tops on each side. You want them both to be level. You want it to be there so that you want them both to be at the same space, and you also want it to be at that position so that the 2 sets of wheels don't line up exactly, because you want them to line up with the rails that offset on the base. I found that the easiest way to do that is to basically start with the seat being exactly backwards, and then grab your wheels and slide them in. Now as soon as the gear hits the gear inside, you'll want to use the seat to rotate it into place. You'll want to just continue rotating it up and then rotate the rod up through the top and make sure you have it where you want it. I have the seat level now and there's actually only one gap, so we need to back it back out and try again. This is something you may have to try a few times just to get perfectly. It's not something you're probably going to get on your first try. At least with all of the seats, you may occasionally get it. So you'll want to just keep playing with it until you get your 3 gaps there. I now got that side completed. It's time to do the other side. So once again, we'll rotate this exactly backwards, stick the gear in, and then spin it into place. That time we got 2 gaps. Let's back it back out. And now we have the same gap on both sides. So I'll finish the rest of the cars, clean this up, and then return to show you how to put it on the track. Okay, we have everything completed here now, and the last step is to put the train onto the track. There's going to be a couple of ways to do this. One way would be to just start at one end and to slide the cars along. If you did this, you would actually have to start and push the train the whole way through, because to attach the trains, you have to do them sideways like this. So that is an option, and I've done it that way before. However, with this one, I actually think it's going to be a little bit easier. If we slide the first one on the front and then attach the rest just over the track. And so we'll begin here and just slide this one into place. Once again, we're getting the wheels lined up with the rails, rotating the seats if necessary just to get that bottom one to line up as well. Just like this. Now as I got this on, I realized that I actually want to adjust this a little bit. We actually have 5 gaps here at the top with the gear. I mismeasured earlier. Same thing on the other side, so I'm actually going to pull it back off and I'm going to adjust this so that we have 5 gears there at the top instead of just the 3. So to do that, I'm going to go a little bit beyond backwards and once again twist this through. And now I have 5 on that side, and then we'll repeat that step on the other side. And now we'll slide it back into place again. You may have to adjust the wheel bogies a little bit just to get them to fit. But now we have both sets of wheels lined up. Seats are level, everything looks good. Move on to the second car, and we'll have to make that same adjustment again. Once we have that adjusted, for the second one, we'll want to take this tab that's at the front and stick it in the hole in the back of the train. Stick it in the hole in the car in front of us, and then just kind of twist this into place. We'll need to take the inner wheel bogies and just kind of squeeze them a little bit to drop them in, while taking the outer bogies that attach to the X-rail and pulling them out so that they can slide over the outside. And there we have the attached second car. We'll repeat the same step with the third car. So now that we have all the cars on here, we now have a completed painted model. Overall, I'm really happy with the way that things turned out. Just know that painting a model this size is going to take you a long time to do. As long as this video was, I actually ended up painting this over about 4 or 5 days, a few hours at a time. So plan on putting quite a bit of time into painting it, especially if you want it to look good. In the end, I really like the way that this turned out. Everything's lined up perfectly. I also took the time to paint the box as well. Probably not necessary, but I thought it might look cool sitting next to the train to have the painted box also. And so this is the completed X2 coaster cutout model. Once again, painted from Coaster Dynamics and Print My Ride. Available from Six Flags Magic Mountain or from merch.sixflags.com for $200. The paints, once again, are all from Walmart. I probably spent $7 or $8 on paints, a few extra dollars on brushes. And then the most expensive part was the silver Sharpie, mostly because I could only find it in a multi-pack that cost about $9. And so that's all in about what this cost to do. If this is something you want to do, then definitely take the time. Make sure you get it right so that you have a nice display piece to put up. If you like this video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button down below. If you don't like it, that's okay as well. If you want to see more videos with coaster cutouts and with nano coasters, make sure you hit subscribe. This isn't the channel where I'm going to be posting every day or every week. Just when I get new models, I'll be posting them. The next several videos are going to be nano coasters. I don't have any more coaster cutouts, but I do have a backlog of nano coasters that I need to start putting together as well. So make sure you hit subscribe, and thank you for watching.